We all know about the brutal winters of Russia, but do you know that the rules of wealth in this country operate on a completely different frequency from anywhere else on Earth? We're talking about a woman whose fortune once touched $3.5 billion, who is wanted by 3 different governments, and who is currently using a Soviet-era constitutional clause as her personal shield. But she's not the only wealthy black woman owning Russia. We have 7 others in this list, and trust me, every single story is crazy enough to make your jaw drop. Number 8. Isabel dos Santos, the billion-dollar fugitive who made Russia her fortress. There is no softer way to frame this entry, so let's just say it plainly. Isabel dos Santos is simultaneously the wealthiest black woman ever to operate out of Russia, as well as one of the most wanted financial figures on the planet. And the fact that both of those things are true at the same time is precisely what makes her story the most compelling and the most unsettling opening chapter on this list. Born in 1973 in Baku, Azerbaijan, then still part of the Soviet Union, to a Russian mother and a father who would go on to become the president of Angola for 38 years, Isabel dos Santos was engineered by circumstance to operate at the intersection of state power and private capital. She holds Russian citizenship from birth, which turns out to be not just a biographical detail, but a strategic fortress that has become the centerpiece of her legal survival strategy. Her fortune, which peaked at approximately $3.5 billion, was built through a web of minority stakes in some of the most lucrative sectors of the Angolan and Portuguese economies. In telecommunications, she acquired a 28.8% stake in Zon Multimedia, which she later merged with Sonicom to form Zon Optimus, a transaction structured through a special-purpose vehicle with capital that reached 716 million euros. In banking, she held a 20% stake in Banco Português de Investimento and co-founded Banco BIC Português, which at its peak was generating estimated personal earnings of $160 million annually. She also chaired Sonangol, Angola's national oil company, a position that gave her a direct interlock between state petroleum infrastructure and her private equity portfolio. The architecture of her wealth was sophisticated, deliberate, and, according to Angolan prosecutors, deeply corrupt. In 2020, Angolan authorities charged her with embezzlement and money laundering. Asset freezes followed in Angola, Portugal, and the Netherlands. International investigations, including the Luanda leaks by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, detailed how billions in state funds allegedly moved through her corporate network into private accounts. And here is where the Russian citizenship piece becomes genuinely fascinating from a legal standpoint. Article 61 of the Russian Constitution explicitly prohibits the extradition of Russian citizens to foreign jurisdictions and protects their assets from foreign prosecution. Russia, in other words, became her legal safe harbor, not by accident, but by birthright. She currently maintains residences in Dubai, London, and Moscow, living the kind of life, private jets, exclusive properties, high-priced champagne in rooms most people will never enter, that her critics argue was financed by the Angolan people. She disputes every charge. The legal battles continue across multiple continents, and Russia, quietly, remains the fortress wall. Whether you see dos Santos as a visionary capitalist who navigated a corrupt system better than anyone around her, or as the system's most successful predator, the scale of what she built is undeniable. And the Russian connection that protected it is one of the most interesting intersections of birthright and billionaire strategy in modern financial history. Number 7. Bella Malu, the social capitalist. Redefining what wealth looks like at 25. After the geopolitical complexity of our number 1, Bella Malu represents a completely different but equally instructive model of wealth, one that the previous generation would barely recognize as a business strategy, but which is rapidly becoming one of the most powerful wealth-building mechanisms available to young women in Russia's elite circles. Malu is a fixture of the rich Russian kids phenomenon, an anonymous digital movement that documents the lives of Russia's wealthiest young adults. And her presence at the center of that world is not passive. She has converted social proximity into a genuine economic engine, and the way she's done it offers a fascinating window into how influence actually functions in modern Russian high society. Here's a question worth sitting with. In a country where traditional wealth is concentrated in resource extraction and state-adjacent industries, how does a young black woman build a seat at the table? Malu's answer has been to make herself indispensable to the aesthetic and social infrastructure of the elite. She's integrated into the networks of established billionaire families not as an outsider seeking access, but as a cultural node that those networks actually need, a figure who brings taste, visibility, and a cosmopolitan energy that old Russian money increasingly wants to be associated with. Her financial model, what analysts of the influencer economy might call social capital conversion, runs on network integration, platform monetization, and creative ventures that transition from modeling into film and cultural direction. Luxury brand partnerships flow from her presence at Moscow Fashion Week as a primary guest. Appearance fees come from the exclusive galas and private events that define the Moscow elite social calendar. And her position as a bridge between the African diaspora's aesthetic sensibility and the traditional Russian luxury market is a genuinely novel niche that few others occupy. The deeper point of Bella Malu's entry on this list is what it says about how the definition of wealth is evolving in Russia. Dos Santos built her fortune through corporate stakes and state access. Malu is building hers through cultural influence and social positioning. Both are legitimate wealth mechanics. Both require a specific kind of intelligence and strategic thinking to execute. And both tell us something important about the range of pathways available to black women in a country that most people would assume offers none. Number 6. Yolena Conga, the Russian Oprah, who blew up Soviet-era media with one show. If someone told you that in 1997, a black Russian woman launched a primetime national talk show that tackled HIV/AIDS, homosexuality, and workplace sexual harassment, topics that had been completely unspeakable in Soviet-era media, and that the cultural reaction was described as like a bomb went off, you'd probably want to know everything about her. That woman is Yolena Conga, and her story is one of the most extraordinary personal brand narratives in the history of Russian media. Born in Moscow in 1962, Conga carries one of the most genuinely remarkable family histories on this entire list. Her father was Abdullah Qasim Hanga, the former Prime Minister of Zanzibar. Her maternal grandparents, Oliver Golden and Bertha Bialik, were African-American intellectuals who migrated to the Soviet Union in 1931 to help develop the cotton industry in Uzbekistan. A detail that still sounds like the premise of a novel, but is simply her family's actual history. That lineage gave her both American citizenship through maternal descent and a Soviet intellectual formation that shaped how she thought about journalism, power, and public discourse. Her show, Pro Eto, which translates roughly as About That, aired on NTV from 1997 to 2000 and was the first Russian program to treat the subjects it covered as legitimate public conversation rather than taboo confessions. The audience was enormous. The controversy was real. And Conga, navigating all of it with the composure of someone who had spent her entire life being the only person in the room who looked like her, became a household name across the country. What's worth understanding about the economics of her career is how she turned that cultural moment into 4 decades of sustained relevance. Investigative reporting at Moscow News in the 1980s, directorial roles at NTV through the 2000s, a transition to global audiences through Russia Today, and eventually, in 2020, a pivot to her own YouTube channel, Congost, bringing her to the digital-first economy on her own terms. Her memoir, Soul to Soul, the story of a black Russian-American family, provided both royalties and the kind of international prestige that opened doors on both sides of the Atlantic. Her grandmother's advice to her as a child, "Learn to write, Yelena, because it is a piece of bread," turned out to be the most pragmatic and most profound career guidance she could have received. In a country where political winds shift and media institutions come and go, the ability to create and own the narrative has been her most durable asset. Number 5. Victoria Pierre-Marie, the Queen of Russian Blues. Building a digital empire. Here's a small but telling data point. On a single day in March 2026, Victoria Pierre Marie, performing as Victory Mary, earned over $240 in digital ad revenue from YouTube alone. That number sounds modest until you contextualize it against the daily average wage across many Russian sectors, and until you understand that it's just the floor of a much larger performance economy she's built around herself. Pierre Marie is recognized as the Queen of Russian Blues, a title that reflects both her vocal authority and her two-decade dominance of a genre that exists in a fascinating cultural space. Deeply rooted in American Black tradition, transplanted into the Russian urban intelligentsia, and performed by an Afro-Russian artist who embodies the connection between those two worlds more literally than almost anyone else could. By March 2026, her YouTube channel had accumulated over 23.5 million cumulative views and crossed 363,000 subscribers. Figures that represent not just an audience, but a community built through consistent output over years of deliberate content strategy. Her daily earnings from digital ad revenue fluctuate significantly based on virality and engagement, but the cumulative effect is a baseline of financial independence that supplements her live performance fees in Moscow's elite jazz and blues circuits. What Pierre Marie's career demonstrates, and what makes it worth examining closely, is the compounding effect of artistic authority combined with platform building. The high-end performance fees she commands in Moscow's cultural venues are a direct function of the decades she spent establishing herself as the preeminent voice in her genre. The digital revenue she now generates is a direct function of the audience she built through that reputation. Each reinforces the other, creating a financial flywheel that most artists who rely on either channel alone never achieve. She is a cultural icon for the Russian urban intelligentsia in a way that transcends the music itself. A visible, sustained, decades-long proof that Afro-Russian artistic excellence belongs in the highest rooms of Russian cultural life. And now, she's also a content entrepreneur. Both things, at the same time. Number 4. Cornella Mango. She built 3 careers out of one moment of fame. Reality television has a very specific and very well-documented failure mode. You win the show, or you get the visibility, and then the machine moves on and you're left holding a moment of fame that has no obvious next chapter. Cornella Mango looked at that failure mode and built 3 entirely separate careers to make sure it never applied to her. Mango rose to prominence through Fabrika Zvyozd, Star Factory, the Russian reality television music competition that functioned as the country's answer to Pop Idol, launching careers and occasionally swallowing them. She used her platform not as an endpoint, but as a launchpad into a creative portfolio that spans music production, visual arts, and fashion collaboration, each reinforcing the others in a way that no single stream could sustain on its own. The painting career is the detail that most people don't see coming. Mango is a prolific visual artist whose work incorporates African motifs and Russian artistic techniques into canvases that have found buyers among Moscow's private collectors and gallery spaces. Think about what that means as a business strategy for a second. She's not just making art, she's created a product category that sits at the intersection of 2 cultural aesthetics that almost nobody else is qualified to occupy. African visual tradition meets Russian fine art technique, executed by an Afro-Russian woman who lives inside both worlds. That's not a niche, that's a monopoly. Her music catalog generates consistent streaming and airplay revenue. Her fashion presence at Moscow Fashion Week positions her as both muse and creative collaborator for brands working to integrate multicultural aesthetics into contemporary Russian fashion. And her influence among the younger Afro-Russian demographic is significant. She represents the possibility of achieving mainstream success through the Russian cultural establishment without erasing the distinctly African dimensions of who you are. The through line of Mango's career is creative ownership. She didn't let the Star Factory moment define the ceiling of what she could build. She let it open the first door, and then she built the rest of the house herself. Number 3. Maria Scorsuk, the imperial ballerina who danced her way into history in 1890. Here's a question this list almost demands we ask. How far back does the story of Black women building wealth and cultural capital in Russia actually go? The answer, it turns out, is further than most people would ever guess, all the way back to the Russian Imperial Ballet in 1890. where a woman named Maria Sergeyevna Scorsuk became the only black ballerina in the history of the imperial court. Scorsuk was born in 1872, the descendant of Africans who had come to Russia through the Arab tradition. The practice of African court servants being brought into the Russian imperial household, who were eventually granted privileges, social mobility, and paths into mercantile and civic life that were extraordinary for their era. Her family's accumulated social capital and connections gave her access to the Imperial Theater School, where she trained as a state student before joining the Imperial Ballet, now the Mariinsky, in 1890. During her career, she performed in the historic world premiere of Tchaikovsky's The Sleeping Beauty. She danced in Swan Lake, Raymonda, and Coppelia. Over the 1890 to 1891 season alone, she appeared in 40 ballet performances and 18 opera productions, 58 appearances in a single year at the pinnacle of Russian cultural life. She often performed character roles rather than classical leads, which tells its own story about the limits even remarkable talent encountered in that era. But she was there, on that stage, in those productions, at a time when her very presence was a historical statement. She died in 1901 at 29, leaving a career that lasted barely a decade, but established a precedent that echoes through every entry on this list. The presence of black women in Russian high culture is not new. It is not imported. It is not borrowed from somewhere else. Scorsuk put her name in the imperial records in 1890, and it's still there. Number 2. Nkeiruka, Kira, Ezekh, the curling champion who became a Russian national icon. Curling is not a sport most people associate with Nigerian heritage, the city of Moscow, or a 2-decade career at the top of international competition. Nkeiruka Ezekh, known throughout Russian sports as Kira, has spent over 20 years methodically proving that all of those assumptions are worth discarding. Born in Moscow in 1983 to a Nigerian father and a Russian mother, Ezekh became the defining figure of Russian women's curling, competing in 4 Winter Olympics between 2002 and 2014 and accumulating a tournament record that reads like a sustained argument for her place among the country's elite athletes. 3 medals at European Championships, a historic bronze at the 2014 World Championship, Russia's first ever World Championship medal in the discipline, multiple Russian Championship titles, most recently in 2022, 15 World Championship appearances, 17 European Championship appearances. The wealth mechanics behind elite Russian athletic careers are worth understanding because they're different from the Western professional sports model. Ezekh earns through a combination of federal and regional government salaries from the Ministry of Sports and the St. Petersburg Curling Club, performance bonuses tied to podium finishes at major championships, and the social capital that comes with being a multi-decade national sporting figure. The income is steady rather than spectacular, but the stability of state-backed athletic compensation in Russia means her career earnings are among the most consistent on this list. What's genuinely interesting about Ezekh's role in Russian culture is the position she occupies as a skip, the strategic leader of a curling team, responsible for reading the ice, calling the shots, and managing the team's psychological state under pressure. It's a role that requires the kind of visible, decisive leadership that tends to translate into influence well beyond the rink. She has become one of the most recognizable faces of Afro-Russian excellence in competitive sport, and her 4 Olympic appearances have given her a platform to shape how the next generation of mixed-heritage Russian athletes sees their own possibilities. Number 1. Maria Kecha, the global creative director bridging Moscow, Tokyo, and Seoul. We close this list with Maria Kecha, also known as Maria Fedotkina Maher, and the reason she makes a fitting final entry is that her career is essentially a real-time demonstration of where the story of black women building wealth in Russia is heading next. Kecha is a professional model, content creator, and influencer marketing specialist who has built her business on a premise that would have seemed almost impossible a generation ago: that a young Afro-Russian woman with deep roots in Moscow can operate as a genuinely global creative professional, moving fluidly between markets in Tokyo, Seoul, San Diego, and Russia without being exclusively defined by any one of them. Her wealth mechanics sit inside the influencer economy's upper tier, what the industry calls mega-influencer territory, where the primary product being sold is expertise and aesthetic authority rather than volume of posts. She manages influencer marketing pipelines for skincare and fashion brands, handles negotiation and content delivery for multinational companies, and develops product and lead generation strategies for e-commerce platforms that want access to the specific intersection of audiences she commands. Her professional photography across Tokyo, Seoul, and Moscow functions simultaneously as personal content, portfolio building, and brand positioning, every image doing multiple jobs at once. What Ketcha represents, in the context of this entire list, is the most recent expression of something that has been building in Russia for centuries, from the court servants who became merchants, to the imperial ballerina on the Mariinsky stage, to the media pioneer who blew up Soviet-era television, to the billionaire who used Soviet birthrights to build a global financial fortress. Black women have always found ways to build wealth, influence, and cultural capital in Russia. The tools change, the context evolves, the ingenuity stays constant, and there you have it, 8 women. 8 completely different eras, industries, and definitions of what power looks like. Which of these money moguls impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments, and for more such interesting peeks into how Black wealth is prospering across the globe, take a look at Black Status.